Okay, shalom everyone. I'd like to remind us a little bit of where we are and to relate to a question that was raised the last time we met, which was a few weeks ago. So first of all, we've been dealing for a while with the understanding the conservative movement and its concepts, its criterias, that kind of thing. It's emunot, and specifically through Eliezer sent me an article written by Rabbi David Golinkin, who is, I guess it's fair to say, the leading Talmid Chacham within the conservative Masorti movement in Israel, I should say. And he wrote an article that has been published a few times, few versions, about the attitude and the way that the Masorti movement relates to halakha and reaches halachic decisions, and they have a vad halacha. And so we went through a few things. We're not going to repeat everything. He spoke about the necessity of you have to have tradition and change. They differ themselves. They separate themselves from the Reform movement, specifically that the Reform movement does not accept the authority of the Torah. They take it as a tradition that they can choose from, but not as an authority, whereas the Masorti movement relates to it as an authority, and he claims differs from the Orthodox in the sense that the Orthodox only take the authority and don't leave room for the change, or he calls it the authority and the right to interpret, and Orthodoxy does not interpret. And I'll start off by saying something I agree and don't agree with about that, but also with the question that came up last time we met about the belief in Torah min hashamayim, yes or no. We'll get back to that in a short moment. Okay, so I will say the following. He said one thing about the Orthodoxy, which I agree with, and discussed this with Eliezer at some point. I don't remember if it was right after the shiur or some other time. He quotes the Khatam Sofer, we mentioned this, who coins the phrase Chadash Asur Min Torah. He doesn't coin the phrase exists, and it has halachic meaning, that you can't eat from the new crops of barley, actually, which are ripe around Pesach time. You can't eat from them in Eretz Yisrael, and also in Chutz La'aretz, actually. You can't eat from them. In Chutz La'aretz is questionable. In Eretz Yisrael, it's explicit in the Torah. You can't eat from them before you bring the first sacrifice of a korban mincha, and a sacrifice from the grains and not from a living animal, not by killing an animal. You have to bring that sacrifice to Beit HaMikdash the night after the first day of Pesach, and only then, the next day, you can eat. You don't bring it at night. You harvest it at night and bring it in the morning, and only after bringing it that day can you eat from the new crops of the barley. And so that's the idea. Chadash, the new crop, asur min Torah, is forbidden by Torah law. But the Khatam Sofer uses that phrase to say anything new is forbidden. And he brings an example. He brings two examples that they decided that you're not allowed to change any minhag, anything that's the custom, the way things are done in the synagogue, and that the rabbis cannot give a drasha, which is in the languages of the nations. That's not in Ivrit. And Rabbi Golinkin says this is a revolution. This is not the original Yahadut. This is a change. To say that you can't make any change, not even in a minhag or anything like that, is a change. And let's be honest, did they keep up this decision that rabbis can only give drashot in Hebrew? Or should we end the shiur right here because we have to, or natchil ledaber be'ivrit, okay? So obviously that didn't hold up. And Eliezer and I discussed it, and I absolutely agree that this is a big change, and that I agree with the concept, the idea of there is authority and there is room for interpretation is, I agree with it. We disagree on certain details of this, as we've discussed and we will discuss. But the idea that nothing new can happen, you can't even change a minhag, I agree this is an attempt it's something that happens as a reaction to reform, to the big changes that reform made. The capital C conservative movement was also something that was saying we have to be more conservative than the changes that the reform movement made. So I would expect Orthodox rabbis to say, you know, maybe it's not fair to judge the Khatam Sofer. Today, I would expect Orthodox rabbis to say that we have to be careful with what changes we make, with what authority, what means, what kind of changes. Absolutely. But to say no changes can happen, I don't agree with that. Maybe in the beginning of the 19th century, the Khatam Sofer had to do that. Maybe it was positive. I'm not sure. But I'll tell you an interesting thing I saw. You know, there are going to be elections for chief rabbis of Israel pretty soon, in the next 10 days or 2 weeks. Bagatz decided they have to. The government tried to push it off again and again because of all kinds of politics. There are going to be elections. And there was a group of religious Zionist rabbis who got together, and there were a few candidates, and they voted one of them. His name is, does everyone know his name? His name is Harav Meir Kahana, a relative of the Rav Meir Kahana of Kach, and he's not like that, but he's a Kippas Ruga, he's a Dayan. He taught in one of the Hester Yeshivot, and he makes a very good impression. I don't know him personally. And so he was voted. Now there's another Kippas Ruga, interesting rabbi, who's more right-wing than Rav Meir Kahana, who also wants to be voted, and there were others, but they took a step back, and he's still trying to get voted in spite of the decision of the committee of Zioni Dati rabbis who voted for Rav Meir Kahana. And someone wrote a post opposing to his being voted, this other rabbi. I can mention his name. His name is Rav Micha Alevi. Him I do know. He's the Rav of Petach Tikva, Nachon. And he apparently has done a wonderful job as rabbi in Petach Tikva, in spite of being, maybe I shouldn't say in spite of, if you expect that more open-minded rabbis will succeed more with general public, Rav Micha Alevi is, I would say, if I put myself relative to him, I'm more open-minded than him. But he did a very good job and very well accepted in Petach Tikva. I'm sure he would also do a good job in the chief rabbinate, but there's some opposition to his being voted. And I saw someone who wrote that he has the right to his outlook on Yahadut, that he's more right-wing, connected to this yeshiva called Haramo. But he said they have a mission, they have a role, but he shouldn't be the chief rabbi, meaning there's a balance that's created within Orthodoxy between being more conserving stability, not making changes, and those who are more liberal and want to make changes. There's a certain balance that is created between these two sides within Orthodoxy, and that's legitimate. And the two sides can argue with one another and discuss with one another. I happen to be in one of my other places of work within a series of meetings. I mentioned one of them in Shul on Friday night, a series I've been sent to make a series of meetings with more right-wing rabbis to discuss religious education in Israel, where I work on a different mission. And I had one. The other one is set for 6 days from now, and then working on the third one already. And the idea is, amongst other things, that we should discuss with one another and not, be fighting with one another. So Rav Micha Levi, this person was saying, is a legitimate rabbi. He serves a role within the general broad picture of balances within Am Yisrael, but the person who should be the chief rabbi should be someone more moderate than him, which was a very interesting perspective to take. And so I want to say about the Khatam Sofer and about what Rabbi Golinkin is saying, this is not, there is room for an attitude that progresses more stability and less change within Orthodoxy. But to say that Orthodoxy cannot allow any change, I agree, that is not the way the halakha was for many, many generations. And we have to accept that certain changes are possible. Of course, they have to be done in the proper way and everything else.
What about the postpone? Didn't Hillel make the postpone?
Yeah, we'll mention that soon. We're going to get into a list of certain details pretty soon. I'd like to mention another thing, as I said in the opening. I think, Michael, that you asked a few weeks ago, we mentioned Rabbi Golinkin discusses why do we accept the authority of the Torah. He has a whole chapter in this article that he wrote, that is this manifest that he wrote, that is about why do we accept the authority of the Torah. And one of the reasons he gave was because it's given from heaven, Torah min hashamayim, and he quotes someone who wrote about it, Rabbi Jacobowitz, who was the chief rabbi of England, Orthodox. And so my impression was he's saying this is part of our Masorti acceptance of of Torah being given from heaven. It has godly authority. We accept that authority. And Michael said that you were in a lecture of, I believe it was a reformer conservative rabbi.
He was a conservative rabbi from JTS.
Okay, who said that things that they're different from this and different from that. He said that they don't believe in Torah min hashamayim. So which one is right? So I contacted Eliezer's daughter, Rabbah Chaya, who is now the head of Shechter in Israel, and I asked her this question. And her answer was very interesting, and I invite you, Eliezer, to talk to your daughter, like I exchanged messages with her. And she said that it's a good question, that there isn't clarity about it in the sense that there isn't one position of all the rabbis of the movement, and everyone speaks about something godly about the Torah and accepting the authority, but is it given from Hashem? Is it given with what's the word? Hashra'ah, with
inspiration.
Inspiration, thank you, with godly inspiration, but man-made with godly inspiration. You know, what exactly does it mean? There's a certain scale of saying that the Torah has something godly about it. It can open a certain scale where you don't see it's just something human, it's just tradition of a nation, but it's not godly. There can still be some room for differences there. And she said that's not 100% clear. And so you can hear a rabbi speaking like this and a rabbi speaking like that. And it's even, there's something, you can look at it as a weakness, you can look at it as a position that leaves room for that kind of scale where things could move a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. Everybody, I think, in the Masorti movement, if I understand her correctly, would say there's something godly about it. Is it mamash given from Hashem? That's, you know, that can be discussed, but they agree on the authority. So before we move forward, if anyone wants to comment on these things, Eliezer, you get first rights thanks to your daughter.
Get a lot from but first of all, we tried to figure out who it was that made that speech that you listened to. Yeah, and we looked up the heads of the philosophy department at JTS. We couldn't quite figure out. But one, I think, I mean, like one of them might have been a Reconstructionist. You know, I mean,
In JTS?
where was what's his name? The founder of Reconstruction, Mordechai Akap.
Yeah.
Was he at JTS?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
I
maybe-
don't think so. Happens to be a relative of my wife, but
oh,
Kaplan.
they mentioned that also.
Yeah.
But anyway, about this, I mean, I'm not sure that every Orthodox person would say that Torah was dictated to Moshe, because
Okay.
there are problematic passages in the Torah,
Very interesting.
like
Eight
what
of
happened
them.
after Moshe's death.
Okay. Okay, good.
And also, of course, that famous thing about the kings of
Edom.
Edom. So, I mean, I personally think it's almost an irrelevant question, although everybody asks it, because the Torah tells us what Hashem wants, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and so what do we care? Found out.
Okay, I
It's
think,
a gift from Kadosh Baruch Hu.
okay. I'll explain a little bit, and I will agree with you to a large extent, Eliezer, and I discussed this a little bit, and we didn't talk, Chaya and me, we just exchanged messages. but I did say this in my last message to her, that Eliezer is saying, let's start with this. There are certain places in the Torah Shebichtav, in the 5 books of the Torah, where it seems to be difficult to say that this was given to Moshe. The most famous and most powerful example is about the death of Moshe, where the Torah describes that Moshe goes up to Har Nevo and he sees the land and he dies, and then there are a few more psukim in the Torah before it ends. So who wrote that?
There are eight,
So there are a
eight
few
of them.
explanations. You could say that Moshe was given these psukim even before he died. That's one of the explanations. Or you could say that Yoshua filled this in. In any case, that it opens, I'm not getting into the whole discussion. It's based on a certain passage in the Gemara and commentators, but it opens a little, what do you call it? A sedek, a crack. It opens a crack to say that maybe it doesn't mean that every letter in the Torah was given by Hashem to Moshe. And then there are other things where the Torah says, Ad hayom hazeh, to this day. What does it mean, Ad hayom hazeh? If we're talking the days of Moshe, it can only mean generations later. Or that the Torah mentions something historically that happened after the time of Moshe. So there are commentators, I'll put it this way. There are Orthodox rabbis who will say, Ma pitom, akol nitan leMoshe, he got prophecy, this, that. There's no room for even thinking about the question. Anything you say will be heretic. Anything you'll say besides Moshe was given every word in the Torah. But there are other rabbis in the history of the Jewish tradition who did give a little bit of room for things like this, very, very small and very, and they didn't make a big deal of it. If you're interested in someone who discusses this in Ivrit, there's a rabbi in Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rav Amnon Bazak, at the Gush. Rav Amnon Bazak, who is also a teacher in the yeshiva, Gemara and everything else, and also is one of the experts that came out of that yeshiva in Tanakh. And he wrote a book about dealing with challenges to the belief in Tanakh today. I don't remember the name of the book right now. You know what? I think the book is called Ad hayom hazeh. The headline of the book is Ad hayom hazeh because of this question of saying something in the Torah until this day, which means generations later. How can it be in the Torah? It's only one of the, I don't remember, 8 or 9 chapters, main chapters in the book. I love the book. I think it's great. I use it a lot on another issue of historical, archaeological finds that seem to contradict the Torah. Do they, don't they? How do you deal with it? Things like that. His main goal is that people who will meet all kinds of things, they graduate from the yeshiva. In the yeshiva, they're taught Torah, and they don't open these questions with the talmidim, with the students. And then later on in life, they're going to meet these questions. They're going to lose all their Emunah in the Torah because they were never taught how to deal with these questions. So he writes the book so they will have tools to deal with these questions. That's number one. And number two, he says, I want to be an honest person. I don't want my Emunah to be based on hiding from questions. So I'm dealing with the questions. And he does. So if you want to read about many other issues and this issue as well, I recommend that book very much to read about it. Be'ivrit. I don't think Rabbi Bazak's book has been translated into any other language, into English. Maybe it has, I can ask him, but certainly in Hebrew, with someone who maybe can explain some of the things that are written there if you want. If anyone is really interested in getting into this, that's one source that I know of. I'm sure you can find other sources in English, but we would have to ask someone who's more versed in English books and articles. But it does exist. So what Eliezer is opening is this crack that could say Orthodox rabbis who totally accept Orthodoxy and Halakha and the total authority of the 5 books of the Torah without changing one letter, still can have a little bit of also a kind of scale about what exactly does it mean. It will not be the identical scale as conservative rabbis will have, as Masorti rabbis will have. But there is also a smaller, less diverse scale on which Orthodox rabbis can move a little bit and have different opinions if they're aware of these issues. I have to say, I'm being extremely critical of, but also sad about. There are Orthodox rabbis who are very, very great Talmidei Chachamim. They learn a lot, but they never learn about Emunah. And they can be extremely full of knowledge about halakha, and their emunah is very basic and haven't dealt with any issues and questions because they think it's forbidden. And I think that has negative results. So I would say that if you want to deal with these issues, it can be done. There's a certain scale, it's smaller and different, in a different place than that of Masorti rabbis. But it's an interesting comment because it's true that it's also, I would say, look at Moreh Nevuchim. Before you look at this is a much more difficult book to study than of Bazak's book, but the Rambam, Maimonides, Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide of the Perplexed, the whole idea of being perplexed. If you're a student, a disciple of the Rambam, being perplexed is a great compliment. If you have simple belief, naive belief in the Torah, the Rambam says, okay, you're not perplexed. But that's not a compliment. If you study the Torah, you have some questions, you've studied philosophy, and there are some things, discrepancies, and you want to understand how to reconcile is the word I was looking for. Thank you. How to reconcile the things that you've studied. Go study Moreh Nevuchim. That's the Rambam. He discusses what certain words mean, physical, human descriptions of Hashem, all kinds of things, and he enables your emunah to be full faith in the Torah. As I said, not changing one letter, total authority, and at the same time having an emunah that has something which is which is broader, which is not as rigid, and it has an aspect that's more. I'm looking for a different word rather than spiritual, which is more something else, rather than rigid, but full belief in the Torah. So go study Moreh Nevuchim. Exists in English. Go study Arav Bazak's book Ad Hayom Hazeh, and that will broaden.
It exists in English.
It exists in English?
Yes, I just looked it up.
What is it called?
Until this day.
Very nice. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Look for the book in English till this day.
To this very day.
To this very day.
Very good. Very good.
It exists in English, Tzvi.
Very good. Thank you. Michael.
Rabbi. So the word that came into my head when you were kind of searching for a word before was authenticity. That if we're going to study, say, truth, then it needs to be based in something that we think is authentic. And it troubles me that we put so much into learning and interpreting from the Torah, and if it's not coming from what we would consider the highest authority, then it's going to be easy as time goes by for people to set it aside, to find other sources, et cetera, et cetera. What's the real difference between studying Greek philosophers and seeing what Moses wrote, if Moses wasn't getting it from, the direct source? So when I first heard this man or this rabbi deliver that line all those years ago, it struck me, yes, he was the head of the philosophy department at JTS at the time, which may not be where most of their rabbis get all of their information. There's plenty of other classes that they would be going to. But at some point, that sets the tone for the movement, I would think. And the rabbis that are out there today derived from that source. And it's I'm out of the world of medicine, and I see what's happening in medical schools today, and that they are not necessarily being taught what I was taught about a number of things, and it's going to affect the doctors that we all see going forward, not necessarily for the better. So I think it's important for us to understand what's going on in the Jewish world, and I appreciate your bringing this up, because we all interact with that, and it will affect all of us as time goes by.
I will make, thank you. I will make two comments. One is, how much do I agree with you? So much so that I never considered, but if I would consider, put it this way. I had a student once, a student of mine, who moved on, grew up and developed in life. And I met him once somewhere, and he told me he was a very strict, committed Orthodox religious person. And he had a dilemma, in his words, to be the whitest among the black or the blackest among the white, meaning Tzioni Dati on the more, not capital C, conservative side, more blackish, like black hat side within the Tzioni Dati society, or being in a Haredi, raising his children in a Haredi society, but in the most whitish, open-minded side of the Haredim. I then met him a year later, actually, but before I say about what happened a year later, I respected his dilemma. He was making a conscious decision of where he wants to be, understanding that there's good here and there's good there, and there's things that are not perfect anywhere, in all places. And I met him a year later, and he had made his decision to be on the whitest end of the black, which is a different decision than mine. If I were ever considering to be on the farthest right wing of the JTS world, I could have done that. And there are a lot of things in Rabbi Golinkin's writing that I identify with, but I draw the lines in very different places. That is not where I am. I choose to be on the whitest side of the Orthodox rabbis, meaning I have criticism of what happens on the far right of the Orthodox circles. I disagree with these rabbis who know so much about halakha, and they have followers, and they make the big decisions about what Am Yisrael should do, that they don't really know very much about how to handle a society. They know a lot about Ilchot Shabbat and Kashrut and all kinds of things, and they know a lot of Gemara and commentators in the Gemara, but they don't understand a lot about human psychology, about how the nation functions, all kinds of things. But I've made my conscious choice to be within the strict acceptance of the holiness and the authority of every letter in the Torah. And at the same time, let's look for the places that within this, there is room for something that can be changed, and not like the Khatam Sofer. So I agree with you 100% in where we position ourselves. At the same time, I do think it's important for the modern world, for religion in the modern world, to open itself to these questions, to be able to, I think I found my word, to understand your Emunah in Hashem and in the Torah in a little bit of a more abstract way. Still fully accepting the text of the Torah and the authority and the being given from Hashem, and at the same time understand things in a little bit of a more abstract way, because I believe it's more true, but it's also in a world where people have freedom to think, they're going to raise questions, and we have to be able to accept that there are other explanations than what someone else says. And when when a non-religious person or a religious person, someone growing up in religious circles, will raise a philosophical question about Emunah, and the only answers are going to be, you don't understand. They're going to try to push him back and explain to him why he doesn't understand, and the absolutely naive understanding of the Torah is the only right one. That's not going to work. And I believe that we have to put forth a little bit of a more abstract way of understanding that can be accepted by many people in the modern world. And I also believe it's closer to truth. We don't know exactly, we don't have rational understanding of Hashem and how the Torah is given, but still I think it's constructive and important.
Agree.
I also heard a shiur from the chief rabbi, the previous chief rabbi of France, and he was saying that, in fact, in the Torah, you don't talk about emunah, you don't talk about religion, you talk about rules. So you have to follow rules, you have to do this, that, you have to follow the mitzvot, you have to do certain things. So it's more some concrete things that you have to follow. So the emunah is for Hashem, but not the Torah itself. But in fact, the Torah is like a guide of and help us to in our life. And he was saying that even now it was even easier for us to follow all the rules, all the mitzvot, and to understand them, because everything, we have all the comments, we have all everything which was written on the Gemara and on everything that we have now help us to follow all those rules and to follow all those mitzvot that we have to accept and to understand that it's, and the Emunah is more for Hashem and not for the 5 books of the Torah themselves.
Let me ask you, the impression I get from my French, David friends, is that the Rabbanut in France is very, very, very not capital C conservative, very not open to change or to new ideas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But this chief rabbi was very controversial because he also
What's
studied,
his name?
Gilbert Mine, and he also studied a lot of philosophy. So he was more, in the way of wanting to make not changes, but what is possible to do. We can make some changes that not so conservative that other people on the Rabbanut can do.
Yeah.
So it's also very interesting to have this.
I will just say that one of the things I quoted last time was from Rav Avram Yoshua Heschel, who was a JTS rabbi. And one of the things he said, that after all the Emunah and all the philosophy and all these issues, what is going to form us as Jews is the way we carry it out, is the mitzvot. And if we don't accept the authority of the Torah and follow it practically, in practice, it will be a theory. If we follow it in practice, it turns us into Jews, into active Jews. So in that sense, I agree. But I also think there's a certain, I'm not sure, but maybe there's a side of a fear that we can't convince people of the Torah. It's easier to convince people about Emunah, that there is some creator, that we don't see him, and to look at the world and say it just happened by coincidence. A lot of people can accept that there's something higher that is behind this world. But the letter by letter, the giving of the Torah and so on is much more difficult for people to accept and to convince. And maybe a certain way of going around that is to say, well, we believe in Hashem, the Torah is just and it's important for me to be able to discuss the same way I said about Hashem, like Moreh Nevuchim, to be able to discuss, yes, about the Torah, like the questions of Ad Hayom Hazeh, or things that discuss about things that happened after Moshe's death, to be able to deal with these questions, because otherwise somebody is going to leave Yahadut because of these questions, if he doesn't have good different answers than the other more rigid rabbis would give him. So, and I have to say, one of my or two of the things that it's almost the same, two aspects of one of the things that I feel very strongly about the Torah is that it's easier for us today to accept the Torah than it was in many previous generations. So many things in the Torah that were said for thousands of years ahead, we look at them now as past. Also blessings and promises, and also punishments.
That came
Terrible punishments have been realized. Amazing promises and return to Eretz Yisrael has been realized from prophecies from 3,000, from 2,500 years ago. It's amazing. So I still have questions to deal with, but I think it's a strong basis for Emunah, that there's something here that's beyond the regular scope of human thinking.
When you said that if we act and if we whatever rules we make are theory, they're theory until they actually achieve practice. And it seems to me that in Judaism that's the way things go, that there's no real central authority like the Pope, for example, in the Catholic religion, in that sense. And a tradition becomes a tradition over time, and it has longevity. If it doesn't have longevity, it fades out. And so that you can view it as a tree that has branches, and some of the branches are rich and they progress and they thrive, and some of the branches just wither because people don't follow that particular theory. So but that's going into the future. We can't predict the future. Right? We don't know where the future is going. So we can think about making changes now, but we don't know what the effect of those changes will be in the future. So let's instead look backwards. Right? Let's instead look backwards in the sense that, okay, what changes were made, let's say 200 years ago, 500 years ago, and did they thrive? Did they, If those changes were made and they thrived, then that means by definition that change can happen. Right? And the change works. If changes were made and they withered, then change doesn't work. And that's an empirical question.
So first of all, that is the plan for the next stage. If we, it's okay, it's fine that we're discussing, but maybe today we'll be able to start it and discuss exactly that question of changes over history and what happened with them. And then to try and understand what does that mean about what we can or cannot do today. So that's the next stage in our plan. Another reaction that I would have is there is not one pope, but there is a formation of authority within halakha that doesn't exist today, and the Masorti movement considers its board of rabbis or Vad halakha to be able to make decisions, at least for those who want to accept them. But again, they don't claim that they are Sanhedrin or anything like that. And I find it, I think I've mentioned this, that I find it totally unreasonable that there are people who have created a Sanhedrin and voted themselves to be the Sanhedrin, and they think that, you can be the Sanhedrin for your family if you like to, or your close friends, but what does it mean to Am Yisrael? But nonetheless, we have had certain ways of, as you say, of certain suggestions were made, were they accepted or not accepted? Let's discuss that. And one other thing is that part of what conserved Judaism throughout all these hundreds and thousands of years is the fact that there is this basis of authority and that we don't change easily. Change does not come easily, and it's not every generation can just take Judaism and do what they want with it. It has to be within a certain branch of a tree, within certain boundaries. And things were not accepted easily, and sometimes there were struggles over it. And that is necessary, including the struggles that we're struggling now, on the one hand, with people who don't want to accept changes that we think are proper, on the other hand, with people who are making changes that we don't think are proper. So it's a kind of struggle that we have to handle, hopefully in a respectful way, but still has to be handled. And one last comment before maybe we'll be able to start getting into the details of changes that were made would be the Gra, Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon, as he's called, and the Chassidut, mainly the leader of Chabad, Rav Shneur Zalman Miladi, created Chabad, because Chassidut was moving to a more spiritual side, spiritualistic, less careful and committed to certain halachic details. And the Gra fought against Chassidut. And one of the things I learned some decades ago, which was an eye-opener for me, is that it's very possible, from one of my teachers, Zichrono Livracha, Rav Shagar, is that the Gra may have saved the Chassidut, because Chassidut could have ended up becoming something similar to Christianity, which moved away from halakha and very spiritual, but did not keep the framework of being committed, of authority of the halakha. And by fighting against Chassidut, you may have created a situation where Chassidut is part of Yahadut and didn't wither out from Yahadut. So it's very interesting how these struggles might happen. And again, it's the balance between different forces. So if we can, let's start getting into a certain list of examples that, sure enough, Rabbi Golinkin gives, and they're not only his, but the first thing he does is he makes a list of changes within the tradition, not in the last hundreds of years. Let's go to the Mishnah and the Gemara, things that were accepted in the Mishnah and the Gemara. And he brings a list of things that are called in the Mishnah Barishona Hitkinu, meaning at the beginning they made a certain decree and later they changed it. And that can be in certain halachot that have to do with how you announce when you found a lost object that can change in different times because of different circumstances, and what signs you have to give that it's your lost object, or about, Rosh Chodesh was originally not set in a calendar, but decided upon every month when people saw the new moon and came to testify that there's a new moon, meaning it's the first day of the new month. The month could be 29 days or 30 days. And there were changes in the question of who can give such testimony, who is kosher for giving such testimony, how you give the testimony, what things are permitted for them to do, come on Shabbat and things like that. There were certain changes. He mentions Pruzbul, which Tova you mentioned before. Pruzbul is about Shemitah. At the end of Shemitah, every 7 years, if a person lent money, A lent money to B, when the year of Shemitah ends, B doesn't have to return the money. It's nullified. But then what happened is people stopped giving loans. And so the people who needed the loans, which are usually not the rich people, couldn't get loans. So Hillel made a certain decision about that, how it can be handled. And we all do at the end of a Shemitah, we write out a Pruzbul, and our, if the bank owes us money, that's a pretty good situation. If we don't owe the bank money, the bank owes us money. We have
Right.
savings, so we
Okay.
we don't lose them, and the bank still has to pay us after Shemitah and other things like that. Or about the bikurim, the first fruits that were brought to Beit HaMikdash from Shavuot and on. The original halacha was a person who brings his fruit, he reads it. And then they made a change. They decided that the Kohen would read for everyone because there were people who were embarrassed. They couldn't read Hebrew. They couldn't say the psukim properly. So they wouldn't bring their bikurim. So they made a decision that the Kohen will say the psukim that should be said for everyone who brings bikurim. And there are other examples. I have to say most of these things are not very powerful because most of these things are things that would not be controversial and would be accepted today as well. Issues of monetary things, you found a lost object, and how you proclaim or make it known to the public. Today, any rabbi would discuss, is announcing what's the best way to do it, what's probably the best way to announce a lost object today. Anything which is using the internet, which is using social media.
Right.
And I don't think anyone would say today, unless they might say, well, you shouldn't be on social media, but I don't think they would say it's not what the Mishnah said, you can't do it that way, because they would all accept the ideas to get the word out, and it's not about doing it in one specific way. Or even the testimony about the new month is relevant to certain kinds of situations. Now, I would claim, I would agree with Rabbi Golinkin here that this shows us that there is authority to make certain kinds of changes. But then the question is, what would they be? Bikurim is not such a big change either, but the strongest one on this list is Pruzbul. And it's also easier. It's the strongest because it's taking a Torah law, explicit in the Torah,
Mhm.
and the need for the change is clear. And how did he do it? And if you study the topic of the Pruzbul, I wonder, if someone came to do that today, I'm sure it would be controversial, and he would be blamed, accused, being called names, all kinds of names like reform, etc. But still, the way he did it was using existing halachic criteria. You don't just proclaim, well, I'm not nullifying, I'm not giving up on the loans that people money at the end of Shemitah, and magic, it's done. There's a certain halachic way that you have to do it. Yes, he broadened it, he made it more abstract. You don't really have to bring, you're supposed to bring the the contract that someone owes you money, you're supposed to bring it to the court, hand it over to the court, to the Beit Din, and they, since it's in their hands, it's already as if they collected the money, and then it's not nullified at the end of the year. So now you don't have to do that. You just have to make a statement. I am handing all my contracts, all my loans over to the Beit Din to collect the money for me, and therefore none of them are nullified. So he turned it into something much more abstract, but he used halachot that exist within halacha to find a way to make this work. And also there's an issue about money, that money can be moved around by the decision of Beit Din. If a Beit Din can decide that you are being fined and a certain sum of money that is yours and it is in the hands of someone else, he does not have to give back to you for all kinds of different reasons. And it's not considered that they have, it's called mamon gazul biyado. It's not stolen money in his bank account or in his wallet or in his hands. So it's easier with Puzbul. So none of these, I think, are that a stronger proof. Maybe I would take some other mitzvot that we've been discussing because of the Parshiot that we've been reading now, like coming up this Shabbat, Ben Sorer Umoreh, that is in the Torah, and the rabbis say that we don't do it, or it was never done. Or maybe there are reasons of changes in moral thinking and things like that. The bottom line is, I agree, it is possible to do, and I disagree with who has the authority to do that, because what Rabbi Golinkin says, and he brings relevant quotes, at any Beit Din, at any time, can make decisions. There's truth to that, but it's still a question of authority. One of the things he says later on that we won't get to today, but I'll mention it here, is that one of the things they take into consideration is looking at history. How important is from what period in history, and how powerful, what is the source of the authority of that rule makes a difference in can it be changed or not. Torah law is the most difficult to change. Explicit words in the Torah are the most difficult to change. Torah law that is not explicit in the Torah, but it's based on interpretation of the rabbis, I would put that in second place. Decisions made by the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Gemara, third and fourth place. Decisions that were made in the Middle Ages or after, fifth place. Minhagim, sixth place. Minhagim that were they accepted by everyone or only accepted by some?
Yeah.
So there are different levels. I agree with him on that. That makes a hierarchy of what can be changed with more difficulty or with less difficulty. But even that, about a minhag, if it was not accepted by everyone, it's much easier. But if it's a clear rabbinic decree, it's certainly easier than something which is explicit in the Torah.
Right.
But not always, even if I myself would agree that the change is necessary, I wouldn't say I can do it. Sometimes it needs a decision of an authority like Sanhedrin, or sometimes it needs, I know a rabbi who actually passed away, but I knew him, who was very much in favor of having a Sanhedrin because there are changes that we should be making, but we need a Sanhedrin to do it. That was his attitude. And I had a lot of disagreement with him about things that I think can be changed without Sanhedrin, but I would agree with him in theory, a Sanhedrin would be great if it would make those changes. I just don't think the Sanhedrin that would be appointed today, that's what they would be doing. But still, I disagree with Rabbi Golinkin about how much authority we have for certain things. For certain things, I would agree. So, for example, which we just discussed in the past, Kaddish by women is one thing that I would say it's not Torah law. It's not. It's clear that it has basis that is not one of the things that is impossible to do. It's more of a question of attitude. Do you want to see women being active in Beit Knesset or not? That's basically the real issue. So I think that's a place where we have room to say today it's proper to do it, it should be done, and so on. So it really makes a difference. What is the source, from what period of time, from what level of authority, makes a tremendous difference on what changes we can or cannot make. And that's a major issue here. Puzbul is the example of something that is making a change from Torah law, but it's not as strong as he seems to present it, I would say.
Have there been any changes in the women's being witnesses?
Not that I am aware of. Within Orthodox world, certainly not. And I would assume in Masorti, maybe yes. But let's discuss some other things. It continues. This was up to the time of the Gemara, which is the maybe 5th, 6th century, Geonim, 8th, 9th, 10th century. But he goes on to the Middle Ages and later, and he continues with other things. For example, he brings in some interesting examples. He says in South Africa, the reform was in Europe. When Jews moved to America in the 19th and 20th centuries, reform got on a boat and also moved to America.
Right,
But in South Africa, there was no reform movement.
right.
And in South Africa, there's no Khatam Sofer atmosphere, which is not true today because as the world became more global, everything became more global. But North Africa in its time had very strong, large Jewish communities, Sephardi communities, and the rabbis were much more easygoing with changes that are fit for the times, and were not so rigid and so worried about. I don't know how much they knew about what's going on with reform in Europe. Maybe they didn't hear about it, maybe they did. But for instance, he says in Morocco, there was a Moetzet Rabbanim, like a group of rabbis, a committee of rabbis that made changes. He says already in the 14th century, they made a decision in Spain that girls, single girls, what was the change they made? Single girls get the inheritance equal with the boys. Okay, not women equal with men. Single daughters, if the father passed away, single daughters share equally the inheritance with their brothers. By Torah law, only men, only
Men.
boys get the inheritance, not daughters, not women. But they made that decision because something changed in Spain. They didn't make this for all women. If you're married, you don't need the money. Your husband makes money, not you. It wasn't necessary socially. But just to say that they were able to accept this. And he says later on in the 40s and 50s in Morocco, they broadened this change. They were ready to change it, broaden it to a modern existence, to what would be right for modern society. But what happened is that state of Israel was established and the Jews left Morocco. So this committee of rabbis stopped making their decisions. One of the famous decisions of the opposition to reform in Europe was that you're not allowed to make a change in the structure of Bet Knesset. And you can't move the bima where you read the Torah to the front. It was moved to the front by reform communities for the simple reason is that's what they saw in churches. They wanted to be modern. And so the Orthodox rabbis, in opposition to reform, made a decision they're not allowed to move it to the front. And take a look at certain Orthodox shuls where the bima is pretty much forward, but they have a row of seats in front of it or 2 rows of seats in front of it because it can't be totally at the front of the shul. Bezrat Hashem, we should come to build a building. We'll have to take that into consideration without changing the fact that it will be pretty far forward, close to the Mechitzah, which the rabbis in Europe 150 years ago would have banned me for. But one of the points Rabbi Golinkin made was in Cairo or in Morocco, they had no problem with that. They didn't have a reform movement, and if they moved it forward for reasons of it was better for people to hear or to bring the community together around tefillah or whatever the reason was, they were easy to make that decision because they didn't have this pressure of the reform. I'll mention 2 other changes which are very interesting. One of them is that there were several young men who carried out private weddings. They did kiddushin. They performed kiddushin, so they married a certain woman, but they had no intention of staying with them. They wanted to be able to live with them for a while, and it wasn't this 21st century where people can live together, not according to halakha, but people do without being married, but they wanted to be within halakha. So they made these private weddings. You don't need a rabbi, you don't need rabbanut. And the woman ends up, and they live with her for a while, and then they move on, and she is left aguna without a get, without being able to marry anyone else. And the rabbis in Egypt made the following decision. Anyone who makes a private kiddushin without the rabbanut, what's the word? Mafki'ah. It totally invalidates the kiddushin,
Yes.
which is something that exists in the Gemara. And if you were to ask me today, I would say we should use this against abusive husbands or someone who is a sarvan get, who Beit Din says you have to give a get and he refuses to. This is what I would do, and I would do it. You do it once or twice, and then you've solved the problem because the third guy or the next guy in line knows that if he plays games, this is what's going to happen. Rabbis are very much opposed to this because it shakes it moves, not only rocks the boat of halakha, it
Encourages.
makes marriage unstable. It creates a lack of stability for marriages in
Right.
general. But I think if you did it once or twice in extreme cases, maybe after 5 years of someone being stubborn and not giving a get or things like that, then I believe it will make marriage much more stable today. But that's a bigger question. But it's not being done, and it hasn't been done for hundreds of years. But the rabbis in Egypt did it because it was better for stability of marriage and for holiness of marriage and for morality of marriage, and they stopped the phenomenon. This whole phenomenon came to a halt because they won the struggle.
I didn't understand.
The people,
How did they cancel the marriage?
there are certain ways of doing it. I'd rather not get into the details of halakha, how you do it. Basically, if you did kiddushin by money, you can, like I said before about money, you can decide it's not yours. I can decide the money wasn't the groom's and there's no kiddushin. But they also lived together and had relations. So what does that do? So nonetheless, the Gemara says, yes, they have the authority to nullify and so on. But it's not practiced today. It hasn't been practiced for a long, long time. But they did it because it was necessary there to struggle against this. Now, if you ask me today in Israel, what's happening is people, a lot of people, not everyone, a lot of people are still getting married with the Rabbanut, thank God. But there are people who get married without any Rabbanut, just want, civil marriages, Jews marrying Jews, civil marriages, not religious marriages. There are people who get married with a rabbi outside of the Rabbanut because they don't trust the Rabbanut if it comes to breaking up the marriage. They'll be too strict, they'll be too rigid. And so the Rabbanut says, we are holding up the halakha. And I think what they're doing is causing terrible damage to halakha, because if you're too rigid in today's free, open world, you control those people who decide to accept your authority, but you don't control the people who decide they don't care about you and they're just going to do it outside of your ability to control things. So people are getting married without any halachic marriage, or I'm not sure what's worse, halachic marriage that is not registered anywhere. And then what happens if they break up and they don't do it properly with a get and so on? So these are real serious problems. I'd like to mention that Rabbi Golinkin quotes a Rabbi Eliyahu Chazan from Cairo, an Orthodox rabbi in Cairo. There were no conservatives, Masorti, or Reform in Cairo. Let me just see that I find it. 1 second. I want everyone to be able to see the quote in Hebrew, but I will explain it in English. Go. Yes. Here we are. Okay. So I can raise this to share. Here we are. Right here, you see the name Eliyahu Chazan, and under that is the quote. And the quote says the following. He says, man, God is not man. Lo ish el. You don't need my picture now. I'll let everybody see this. I can read it from here. Right here. You see, lo ish el. Some of us. Lo ish el. God is not a human being who changes his opinions according to the, whatever is flying at that time. And that he will change his decisions to break the laws and laws that are just. And his wonderful Torah, his wonderful Torah, showed us that we should know that it is eternal. The Torah is eternal for all times. In every generation, he says, we see nations that rise and disappear. They get lost. They stop to exist. But Am Yisrael and Am Yisrael's rules continue to exist. Many rules and Torot like clothing, have been changed. You know, you change your shirt, they change their religion. And Torah Elohim Chaim Leolam Omedet, the Torah of Hashem continues to stand forever because it has this eternal aspect to it. That's paragraph 1. Look at paragraph 2. Because the Torah, the Holy Torah, was given to physical human beings, and they go through changes. The Torah doesn't go through changes. People go through changes. The times go through changes. Therefore, the Torah came with a tremendous wisdom that allows us to interpret it at any time so that we can continue the Torah in the changes of the times. And the Holy God, Ha'el HaKadosh, Nikdash B'Tzedakah, V'Kideshanu B'Mitzvotav, Lishmo El HaShofet. Hashem, who gave us the holy mitzvot, told us you have to listen to the judges, meaning the rabbis who make halachic decisions. So, and every generation, there are going to be new judges, and they have the right, they have the authority to add or to distract, to change, to cancel, to make a new decision, as, this is not a good expression in modern Hebrew, kasher ya'aleh al rucho. Kasher ya'aleh al rucho in Hebrew today is used as, do whatever you want. It doesn't mean that here.
But he says, Asher Ya'aleh al Rucho B'yirat Hashem. B'yirat Hashem.
People who have the fear of God on their face all day, and they have the authority, they can make these changes. This is a quote that Rabbi Golinkin brings from an Orthodox rabbi in Egypt, who is saying, on the one hand, the Torah is eternal. On the other hand, the world changes. So sometimes changes are necessary not to change the Torah, to enable the Torah to continue to exist and apply in the changes that are occurring in the world. A fascinating combination of the rabbi writing these two aspects. And this is in Egypt where they made that new decision. So I would say it depends on on how the rabbis in a certain place see it. It would not be accepted in Israel today by the Rabbanut, by the majority of, not the formal Rabbanut, not the establishment. It would not be accepted today by the majority of Orthodox rabbis in Israel. I agree that description is pragmatically, is factually probably true. But there's more that can be done than is being done. But at the same time, I say it has to be done within certain criteria. And the next stage is after Rabbi Golinkin gives these examples from the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara through up to modern times. The next stage is, who's next in line making changes? The Vad Halacha of the Masorti movement. So he's going to give examples of what changes two things. What are their criteria? And what changes did they make? So next time we can discuss the criteria and the changes. Do we agree? Do we disagree? Do we have to disagree with everything? Can we agree with everything? Probably not. But see, that's the next stage to discuss as we move on, Bezrat Hashem, 2 weeks from now. Tova.
I just have two short lessons. One thing is that the Muslims, a Muslim that's traveling can take somebody's daughter for the night, and in the morning he'll divorce her. That's exists in their laws. The other thing
is, I have to tell you honestly that this exists in the Gemara.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm mentioning.
But by Rabbeinu Gershom, here's another example to go. I'll make a note to myself.
Right.
Discuss what Mark raised before about giving examples of what changes that were accepted or were not accepted, and how does that influence the whole process. But one of the examples of something that was accepted was Rabbeinu Meor HaGolan in the 11th century, making the decision that that we would excommunicate anyone who took 2 wives,
right?
Which was accepted then, where his authority was powerful, and it took 900 or 1,000 years to spread to all the Jewish communities, which is an interesting
except the Yemenites.
So what
the
the
Yemenites
Gemara is saying and exists in Islam, including what Judaism says that the Gemara said was possible in those times, certainly would not be accepted today. And I think that the most strict Khatam Sofer followers, I don't know how they would reconcile it with Chadash Asur Min Torah, but I think they would absolutely agree. No way, we don't do that today.
Yeah. There was,
Okay?
there was one more thing. I think that when they read the Torah, like Ezra, they would translate. Somebody would read and somebody would translate into Aramaic at that time. And I believe that this was done also in Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, when
It
they,
was done in Teiman. I don't know about
in
Egypt.
Teiman,
Teiman.
right,
I just saw this last week, a psak of Teimani rabbis. What was their psak?
that you have to read both.
They have to continue doing the tarjum. It's called tarjum, even though now people understand the Hebrew and they don't understand the tarjum.
Right, but that's
So
there. Right.
obviously, the question was that Teimani communities in Israel raised the question: can we, it makes their laning twice as long. They read every pasuk and every tarjum. Every pasuk, they read the pasuk and tarjum. I've experienced it.
Wow.
One of my brother-in-laws is Teimani at their bar mitzvahs. They do a
So they
partial
yeah.
tarjum. And so people questioned it. Is it necessary? Can we put it away? Because, it takes twice as long and we don't even understand it. The decision of the committee of Teimani rabbis, but you have to continue.
Continue.
You have to continue it.
The kids go to
Teimani,
the
I'm
kids.
not going to interfere
Little
with
kids go to the Mori. The kids come from school and they go to the Mori. All the Yemenites.
They go
You throw
where?
them wherever they
To
fall
the
in the
Mori.
Quran, they know to read it. Yes.
What's the
The
more?
Mori. More, but
is
to
the
the Mori.
teacher who teaches young boys
Yeah.
to read Torah from age 5 and so on.
Right. It's
You
amazing.
give them an aliyah anywhere in the Torah when they're 8 or 9 and they read it like that.
And it doesn't matter which side they get, they can read from different sides. It's amazing. Okay,
Interesting.
thank you.
Sides.
Hmm?
Meaning they could stand on the opposite side of the book.
And they can read because
mean
they
upside
had,
down?
yeah, they didn't have
Upside
many
down?
books at the end. Yeah, they didn't have many books, so the kids would everybody would sit around it,
Wow.
and they would read from all sides.
Okay. Thank
Wow.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm making a note
Wow.
of Mark's question to start with next time and to go through the list that Rabbi Golinkin makes and
Thank you.
express our opinion about what yes and what no.
Okay, thanks.
Very
Tov.
good. Thank you.
תודה רבה.
Well, everybody.